News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of paltalk.com, the #1 multimedia community on the internet with more than 4.5 million unique subscribers. Your host for this evening is, well, it's me, folks, Boaz Frankel. Gary is not with us today. Gary has off. He's on a field operation, so you're just going to have to suffer through this show with me. Maybe some of you like it, maybe some of you don't. Well, you're stuck with me. Anyway, we're going to have a great show this evening, folks. We are going to talk about a critical topic in the Middle East. We're going to talk about women's rights in the Middle East, what's happening there in particular in the Middle East in Saudi Arabia, one of the most strictest um, uh, countries in the Middle East that is governed by Sharia law through the Wahhabi sect of Islam, and how women are fighting for their rights there to be able to do the same things that we do in the free world, in the Western world. We have a special guest with us this evening who is going to tell us about the developing trend in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia. Our guest for this evening is Hassan M Fatah, who is a Middle East correspondent for the New York Times based in Dubai. Hassan, in 2003, Mr. Fatah co-founded Iraq Today, an English language weekly newspaper written and edited by Iraqis, leading the paper to become an internationally recognized publication. In 2004, Mr. Fatah helped found Aswat al-Iraq, Iraq's first independent non-governmental news exchange funded by the United Nations and focused on developing a new generation of Iraqi journalists. His reporting and writing has appeared in Time, The Economist, Prospect Magazine, and The New Republic, among other international publications. First of all, let's say good evening to Mr. Fatah. How are you today?
Very well. Thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here on News Talk Online on paltalk.com. We have an audience here that are eager and waiting to talk to you. Let's kick it off by let me ask you let's kick it off with the first question, Hassan. I'll call you Hassan. It's easier by first name.
Please do.
Thank you. In Saudi Arabia today, that is the way we know Saudi Arabia today, which is, as I had mentioned, one of the strictest Islamic countries today when it comes to women's rights. In fact, as a matter of fact, they really had no rights up until recently. And, women are not allowed to go out in public alone. They're of course dressed in traditional long robes covering most of their body. They don't go to I think that they're not even allowed to go to a public cinema if there are any in Saudi Arabia. They're not allowed to drive. A lot of things they just can't do. And my first question to you is, how is this changing, given that the Saudi Arabian government's laws are really based on old tradition? How are the women in a legal manner approaching this issue?
Sure. I should stress, in fact, that women are not allowed to do a lot of things in Saudi Arabia, but they do. But in many ways, they do have certain rights and certain. They are able to do certain things. They certainly can go to the market, but they have to be covered up in what's called an abaya. It's a black cloak that covers most of their body and doesn't show off any of the shape of their body and that sort of thing. Both sexes, in fact, have a lot of constraints on them in Saudi Arabia due to the conservative nature of the religion there, and to the way, and I should say, due to the control of very conservative religious leaders there. That said, it's sort of a time of change, very slow change, but very interesting change. The idea that today you have a debate going on within Saudi Arabia about women's right to drive, and both men and women raising the question as to, there's no religious reasoning for why women are not allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia, and putting that on the public stage. That perhaps even 2 years ago would have been considered the electric third rail, a taboo topic that you could simply not even discuss.
I understand. Now, when again, what is intriguing is how are women getting organized in Saudi Arabia to be able to, let's say, to contest old traditional laws? How do they do that legally when they're basically even the organization of women to do one thing or another in Saudi Arabia is forbidden? How do they approach that problem?
Well, to be fair, I mean, it's not that organization of women is forbidden. Far from it. I mean, it's just that there are some. It's just the nature of the restrictions on what women, and I would also stress, men are able to do. There is strict segregation of the sexes in Saudi Arabia, and there's a lot of emphasis put on that. And emphasis put on, women and men's dress and that sort of thing. But at the same time, over the past several years especially, I think in many ways, thanks to the growth of satellite TV, thanks to a variety of changes that have happened within the country, you're seeing much more political sophistication on the part of women's movements within Saudi Arabia that have been able to essentially start this dialogue and start this debate and be taken seriously for it. In 1990, there was a very famous protest by now, perhaps even infamous, within Saudi Arabia, of a group of women who, noticing all the TV cameras that were there covering the Gulf War, got into cars and drove through a main street in Riyadh. They were quickly arrested. Several of them went to jail. Some of them had to actually leave the country. I think the overwhelming majority either lost their jobs or were severely reprimanded for what they did. It was too much in the face. It was too aggressive a move at that time. And I think that a lot of women, if you talk to them today, will say that was probably the wrong tactic. It's not the goal, but the tactic that's in question. And then I think that today you'll see the women's movement itself far more engaged and engaging men in a different way. Number one, I think that they do embrace religion, and they do use their arguments to fight for women's liberation and women's rights using religious arguments. That in many ways gives them the power and gives them a stage with which to talk, and in turn start a buzz about their goal and their cause.
Very interesting. Do you think that this trend of women starting to achieve some freedoms in Saudi Arabia has to do with a certain degree of common sense that actually comes from the men? Let me give you an example. For instance, if a woman cannot go out to shop, if a woman cannot go out to work, this puts, and in today's modern world, if a woman can't do some of the things that men do, even in the Middle East, in a country like Saudi Arabia, that puts more stress and strain on the man because he has to do more things. So do you think that
that's a very important point to make?
Right. And so do you think that that the equal rights is actually being facilitated by the opposite gender?
Well, no, I think, in fact, it's part of a dramatic change that's happening within Saudi Arabia itself. And what that is that women are entering the workforce in droves. And it's an economic reason. The cost of living is rising. It's becoming harder and harder to make ends meet. People have greater and greater aspirations. They see things on TV that they didn't see before. There's greater openness. There's the internet. They can see all the sort of consumer goods and dishwashers and nice cars and all that sort of thing, and they want them. And what that really has done is it's encouraged women to enter the workforce. That has done two things. Number one, it's brought women